statistics must think twice, because today when you see your expenditure on your defense, I was going through the statistics, we are spending 2.6% of our GDP in 2009 and China is spending 2%. America is spending a little more than us, but their overall expenditure in the world of military is 43%, with China coming to 6 and India is about 2. When it comes to the amount of money we are going to waste as an armed forces on the so-called counterinsurgency operations is where the whole balance lies.
So you would rather strike a note of caution as far as using the army in those states. Here we'll take a short break. When we return, we continue our discussion on the use of army in internal security operations. Welcome back. We are discussing the merits and demerits of using the armed forces for quelling internal disturbances and insurgencies. General Shibbar, I know there is reluctance to use the army in internal security situations, but if the army was to be used against the Maoists, what would be the, or what should be the model of deployment? You know, you have the Assam rifles, then for J&K they raise the Rashtra rifles. So should we have a separate force, or should there be a separate training if the army is to be deployed there?
I haven't quite understood what you are trying to get at. If the army has to be deployed, then the army must be given charge of the area, given a task, and everybody else must be placed under its command. If you are fighting in J&K till today and you will continue to fight for 20 more years, the reason will be only this: the faulty method of command. That unified command, the kind of which they have tried to rig up in J&K,
but the army is saying that they are already too stretched and they can't spare troops for this area.
That is it. If the army has to be used, then the army has to find resources. The government has to give them the resources. I remember after Punjab, in one of the meetings where I was asked some questions, and I said, look, I advise you that you should raise enough army to be able to fight simultaneously the J&K, Northeast, and at least 2 other states in India.
But you already have about 1/3 of the army deployed in J&K and in the Northeast. So do you have enough troops to even tackle a situation in 5 states of the country?
You don't have. So you raise. We raise some RR after that. But that is about all. You don't have the resources.
Jal Bajwa, there is a talk of a unified command. Now there is a talk that in each of these states there would be a unified command, but that would be headed by the chief secretary of that state. Is that a viable model?
Don't involve the army in it.
It's not a viable model at all, because their philosophies are different. See, the outlooks are different. The army philosophy, army operational philosophy is so different. If army has to be employed in any part of the country, first of all, I am opposed to it totally, that the army should be applied. We made the biggest mistake in J&K and we are suffering from it. The army has been wrongly used in J&K. And that mistake is still continuing. We haven't learnt anything from it. But if we want to do it, if we are forced to do it, we come to a situation it can't be controlled by any other agency, then the army must be given complete control. You see, one of the fallouts of these employment of army in these situations is these allegations against the army for violation of human rights. Now that is something which the army cannot at times avoid. Now how can you avoid? How can you fight an insurgency with armed people with 2 hands tied behind your back? Now you can't do that. So you see, one has to learn to find a model which must be discussed at length between the politicians and the armed forces.
So when we are talking about a model, Brigadier Dhillon, what should be the model? Because the army has been saying that don't use the serving officers, don't use the army personnel, use the retired officers. Maybe these people could train the police personnel. Is that practical?
Let me give you 3 instances. The first is the period that the army was used in aid to the police in Punjab. I still remember talking to an army commander, then I was commanding a brigade. I said, look, this happens to be the first time that the army is getting used in aid to the police, but I will leave it at that. The second part is a question of using retired officers. Now, General Chibbar was a governor. Governor is a different cattle of fish.
But before that he was also the advisor, security advisor to the Punjab government.
Fine, no problem. No problem about that. But you know, when you think about even the Rashtriya Rifles, now what has happened in Rashtriya Rifles? We started with a little thing. Now we have 30 battalions of regular troops called Rashtriya Rifles.
No, I think much more than that now.
Much more than that. So what has happened? We have got ourselves sucked into a situation that should never have been created. So we have milked our resources, created Rashtriya Rifles. Now what is happening is that these 3 headquarters that you talked about in your preamble that has been created is a similar exercise.
So that means we are getting to a situation from where it will be very difficult to pull out.
Not only that, you will end up blooding your nose, because when you talk of even using retired officers, you know, when you are a serving officer, you wear a uniform. You have a legal mandate. You have an organization that does things. Once you are retired, it's a different environment altogether. So the issue that I am trying to bring out to you again and again is that this army and the Air Force and the Navy of India today should not get sucked into their political crisis being created by these people.
I want to also warn against one danger which has happened in J&K. What I am building on what he has said about the Rashtriya Rifles. You see, I'll give you an example to illustrate that. In 1971, Pakistan sent 2 divisions to East Pakistan, and to raise 2 divisions from the Chinese, they milked the rest of the army. With the result was that their combat worthiness went down immediately. This is what has happened to the Indian Army today. See, we are milking the regular army, which has got a particular purpose, and raising these odd units, odd sort
But
units.
The other suggestion is, as General Shibber said, that you raise more new troops.
Raise them separately, not for the army, not troops from the army, or a separate force must be raised for internal security problems. You raised BSF for this purpose, but this being entirely diverted to another purpose. So raise a specific unit for that, and then you don't have to bring the army in. The army will only come in.
But would such a force require protection like protection under the Armed Forces Special Powers Act?
I don't think you need that, but that question will have to be studied in detail.
I personally feel any person in our context you send to do this job, he must be protected. Otherwise, think of your brother, younger brother, who's fighting this battle in Jharkhand, that after his retirement for next 20 years, he will be attending the High Court and Lower Court and so court in that state.
But General Shibber, the army is drawing huge flack in J&K and in the northeast under these armed forces.
Now that is why I said people must be educated on terrorism. How does a terrorist fight? We don't know. Our people don't know. One of the aims of the terrorist, major aim of any terrorist organization is to get rid of the army from the theatre of operations. So what do? They blame them for various things. Duty, allegations are made so that they get fed up and they stop fighting. The biggest aim of any terrorist organization, whether it is based on Pakistan or based in our own country, their aim is some or the other. The army should not be after us. How do we get rid of the army? All those people who are hand in glove in making false allegations against the army, I am using the word false. Every allegation should be investigated.
But General Shibber, a lot of those allegations against the army were found to be correct also.
If 10 allegations are found correct in 4 years, no harm. Those 10 people should be shot, they should be punished. Yes, army provides for punishment of those people who overstretch the line. But unfortunately in our country, there is no punishment given to those people who make false allegations. Those who create propaganda against the
valid point. Let me move on to another point.
That is what it is.
There have been fears have been expressed by a lot of people that if you keep using the army the way we are using the army, then you actually moving towards a kind of a situation of internal emergency. Are those fears real?
That internal emergency fears, I think, may not be valid, but what is really valid is that your armed forces will become a police force very soon.
Correct.
And you see all the scams, the one that happened in Bombay, the one that happened in Siliguri, is all due to the exposure of the armed forces to this political and economic criteria where they get sucked into it. Emergency wise, no, that's not the real issue. But what is required is that in the matters of national defense, like in the Ministry of Defense, there are certain structural changes that are required. There the defense forces must have a say. They are not having a say in that. That is of vital importance.
Let me read out what Major General S.G. Wong-Bhatkare, he is the retired Additional Director General Discipline and Vigilance from the Army. He had once stated that the security forces today are deployed in as many as 225 districts in 23 states. Now, isn't that situation a little worrisome?
Very worrisome. It's very worrisome. It means all the elements of the state which they have for this purpose, for maintaining law and order, have failed. I mean, we are now falling back upon the army for everything. I mean, in the smallest thing happens, the child falls into a well, we call in the army to take him out.
But General Bajwa, since the basic job of the army is to fight external aggression or to take care of the external aggression, do you think this prolonged deployment in internal security is actually hampering the training of the armed forces?
Of course it is hampering training of the armed forces. And not only hampering training of the armed forces, it is affecting their philosophy. Their philosophy is to use maximum armed power to obtain their objective, which is to capture the tactical objective.
But in Punjab, I think the army was there for more than a year at that point in time in '89. And did it affect the ethos, the thinking?
Yeah, they didn't have to fight in the sense that the army is supposed to fight, had to fight in say Mizoram or Nagaland. Here the thing was very different.
Yes, I think they formed broadly the outer cordon while the police handled the situation.
No, it is not so. The entire fighting was done by the army. Police was kept on the margin.
Okay.
Because otherwise you couldn't have done what we did in fighting.
You see, when you look at the...
But where we succeeded, we built, firstly I had adequate force.
Luckily all was quiet on the border,
I
so you could
had
actually put them
28
into
brigades under my command, under 7 divisional headquarters, under the command of this corps commander. So I had enough forces. Those people had been given tasks in a manner which they could perform. I also created certain pockets where I could send troops for rest and refit.
So with that experience, you are still sounding a note of caution as far as involving the army in the Maoist affected areas.
Yes. Why we did not get into trouble, I must say, my troops were so good, they were so well motivated. We trained them before we put them in.
The troops are the same, so the same can be said of troops today.
We did a lot of work. I don't know how much is being done there. I personally addressed every battalion under my command before I will launch them in the operation. And I told them 45 minutes.
Yes, since you're running out of time, we didn't know the last word.
View your defense, and the general talked about philosophy. For God's sake, view China as a threat. What you are doing is wasting your energy. It's like those within your in-house problems. View it in that context, long term. What would happen after 20 years or 15 years? That is the way to look at the armed forces.
Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us in the discussion. Successive army chiefs, including the present incumbent, General V.K. Singh, are on record saying that using the army in anti-Maoist operations is not desirable. Similarly, Air Chief Marshal P.V. Naik too has said that he is not in favor of using air power against our own people. The government should see the writing on the wall and take steps other than using our armed forces in internal security operations, unless this truly becomes the last resort. That is all in this episode. Do write your feedback. Next week we meet again with a new issue. Till then, good luck and goodbye. And for now, we meet at the bar.